this lesson, we are going to go over the key market sessions to be aware of. These will indicate when key markets are opening at different times, which basically categorize different geographical areas. So let's take a quick look at the key ones. So we have our first one, which would be our London session. Now, our London session is going to open at 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to be going off of Eastern Standard Time, mostly because I am from Ontario, Canada. I'm in Eastern Standard Time. These are the times I know. And also the indicator that we speak of in just a couple minutes will also run off of Eastern Standard Time. So it'll make it easier for you to program any of the settings into that. So we have 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that is the London session. We have the New York session, which represents the New York markets opening. And this is from roughly 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, this represents the North American and specifically New York markets opening. And then the final one, we have the Asia session, which will also include the Sydney session, so like Australia, New Zealand, that sort of stuff. And this one will open at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time and run till about 2 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time. What you'll notice in between that is we are missing, kind of an hour window where we have London opening at 3 a.m. and Asia closing at 2 a.m. We'll change that to 2 a.m. because we also have the Frankfurt session, which does open at 2 a.m. And you'll see a lot of people referencing that in the Discord training Frankfurt, which is basically categorized as pre-London, but we'll include it in London for our purposes here. So we have our key market times. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the indicators on TradingView. And we have this one called Phantom My Session Range. I'm going to open up 3 versions of this. 1, 2, 3. And we'll see. Whoops, I only clicked it twice. Let's click it one more time. Cool. So we're going to set up London session first. We're going to use a red color just to make our life easy. I don't want lines. So we'll go into inputs. And like I said, we'll be referencing an in 3 or Eastern Standard Time rather, mostly because the indicator is in Eastern Standard Time. So for this, we want to change this to 2 a.m. and set it off until 11 a.m. Eastern. So now we have our New York session indicated or our London session indicated in red. We'll go to this one. We're going to change it to a blue color. I'll turn off the lines. Let's do that. Blue. Okay, perfect. And we want to change this to 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. And then finally, we want to do our Asia/Sydney session, which we will denote in a black gray color. Go here, and we want that to be from 5 p.m. until 2 a.m. And what we'll see is we have the markets denoted in various boxes. What you'll notice, when I refer back to this, is we have a bit of an overlap between the New York and the London session, which we can see on each of these boxes where the red intersects with the blue. This is known as the London-New York overlap. This is where we're going to find a ton of markets volume and volatility in this kind of golden window. From about 8 a.m. until 11 a.m. Eastern. So what we'll do actually, just to make things a little bit clearer, we're going to add another session range indicator. We're going to make this from 8 a.m. until 11 a.m. And we're going to mark it as green. And that's great. And what I want to do now is just adjust my London to end at 8 a.m. and my New York to begin at 11 a.m. just to kind of show this in a little bit cleaner fashion. As we know, the New York session starts at 8 a.m. And the overlap would be from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m., which we have denoted in green. So let's just kind of move a little bit over, and we're just going to look at the relationship between these sessions, and we'll start with, this Asia session here. You can see we have an Asia high and Asia low. More specifically, the Asia session starts at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the time from 5 p.m. till about 8 p.m. is Sydney. A lot of the time, the market isn't really moving. We have something called spread hours from about 4:30 p.m. Eastern to 5:30, 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern, known as spread hours. This is where spreads widen. This is the transfer from the New York market onto Sydney and then to the Asia session or the Asia markets opening. More often than not, you have low volume, low volatility, high spreads, just an environment that you don't necessarily want to trade. But for our purposes in this particular video, we're going to categorize Asia as 5 p.m. Starting, just so we don't have to delineate 4 market sessions, because when you hear people refer to Asia session, they are also including the Sydney market as well. So if we look at this, what we can see is Asia prints a high, it prints a low. When New York market opens, we immediately go trade above the Asia high and start to run back into basically the mean threshold of the the London session. And what we can see is the London session creates a high, we create a low, and then we enter this green price, which is the overlap or the beginning of New York session while London is also opening. And what we can see is the first thing that happens, we kind of return back to the top end of the London session, and then we get a ton of momentum in the market, clearing below these Asia session lows. And then once the London session closes, we kind of return back to the top portion of the overlap, and we start to just drift down again. And then what do we see in the Asia session? Consolidation, more than likely, tighter range. As soon as London opens, what do? We clear above the Asian highs or the Asia session highs, and then trade lower, breaking the Asia session lows. Once the overlap begins and New York opens, we drop even further. Where do we drop below? We drop below the previous overlap lows that were printed. If I just scrunch my chart back as well, what we can see is we start to tap into other sessions. So what you'll already see from this is all of these sessions are interacting with one another. We're playing off of previous highs and previous lows of previous sessions, and we're interacting with it. This will be used and form a basis of liquidity that we'll touch on much later in the course. But just to set the scene between understanding these market sessions and also just looking at this in a conventional sense, we can tie this back to the candlestick lesson as well, where we start to get these wicks that we're seeing on the price chart. And if we start to look, they're all interacting with one another at various price levels. And we can see that these start to coincide with market timing at key market times of sessions opening and closing, the lows and the highs that are printing in the market. As we can see, this low, all of this interaction point, begins where we start to see sensitivity, a lot of buying and selling all happening in the same spot. It's no coincidence that they also coincide with the lows or the highs of a particular session before we actually tangibly break through each session's low or high. And then we'll continue here. Like I said, we kind of tap into the New York session or the New York afternoon, so to speak. And then the New York afternoon consolidates. London takes the lows of the previous New York session. We also take the high. London opens. What do? We take the high of the Asian session, and then we start to move down. We start to look. We're tapping into another session. We traded below the overlap from a few days prior to that. New York afternoon starts to pull back. Same with Asia. We start to just get this deep pullback. Where are we likely to start aiming for? The London session highs, and then we can start to see where are we clearing off of previous London session highs. We start to consolidate during the overlap. Where are we going to start to hunt, so to speak, for buying and selling purposes? Previous London session lows, we start to consolidate. Where are we trading above now? The previous overlap highs, we just tap into this, which we will categorize as a supply zone when we actually get into that section on order flow. And then we can see that the London session pulls down. Where does it pull down to? It pulls just below the previous New York overlap, afternoon rather, lows, tapping into a previous Asia session. And then what do? We blast to the upside. We clear above the previous London, a London high here, a London high here. We also trade above this New York afternoon high, and this overlap high. And if we just keep moving, I think you get the point here that each session is important, and it's something to take note of just to understand the interaction, to make decisions. Now, one thing I want to preface on this lesson is, while this is important information, we don't use this to make absolute decisions that, oh, we took, previous session lows, so we should start to see these highs get run. We can use that as the basis for some of the things that we are looking at, but ultimately it's just a tool for our toolbox. So that we can continue to make decisions. It's just a tool in the toolbox to aid in all of our technical analysis, to understand essentially the inner workings of each candle that we're seeing printing on the charts. We can see that we just take the previous high of the New York afternoon session in the Asia session. London respects all of that and just continues to trade higher. If we shrink the chart, where do we clear above? We clear above all of these highs. We start printing newer highs relative to where we are. We pull back in just before the overlap to take this high. We pull back down. We just take the low of, the open of the overlap session. New York afternoon just trades back to the top. And we start to see the transfer here. We clear these highs. Then we break down to the lows in London session. Once London begins to open the overlap, what do? We take out a previous high within the London session, and then we trade lower. And this just goes on, so on and so forth. The indicator is being a little funky here, so we're not really going to, look at this. But as you can see, this just prints a really clear picture of just the interaction between the sessions. You can see when price is moving sideways, when we get a lot of momentum. Where's the momentum usually coming in the markets? It's during this green, but you'll also see a lot of momentum happening in red as well as blue. So this is just the basics of sessions, the London, the New York, the Asia session, what they are, what they represent, and then just a quick overview of the relationship between each of the sessions, how one will trade into another, and use them as future points for buying and selling. That's the key point here. We use that with our candlestick lesson to understand just the rationale behind why these price levels are starting to get targeted. It has to do with the price level here on the right side of the chart. We use that in relation to the candlesticks, the price level. We can add the sessions onto what we're looking at just to add more context, more flair, and more understanding as to what's happening. And you can see that this just is a cycle that repeats every single day, the ebb and the flow between each session. So that is the key market sessions that we should be taking note of.